Welcome back to the course Make It Work React Hooks by Fang. This is the 6th video in the series, Use Context for Area Coverage.
In the past videos, we have been improving the user experience as well as improving the performance. In this video, we'll continue and go ahead to add a feature that gives the site two different themes, light and dark theme. Let's get started. When it comes to the theme in the site, there are quite a few different ways. So here we will be taking an approach that is based on the CSS custom variables. Before we do that, this can be a good time to migrate styles from app.css to a CSS module file, app.module.css. Let's go create app.module.css under the source folder. All right, app.module.css. All right, so inside we can just copy everything and paste it here to get it started. We will name the class to be app, and basically you're going to join these two because we don't need to support the header and the body. We just have one app. Pretty much we're going to have everything as used to be. And now come back, and now we can just, instead of using the old CSS, we delete it and import the new styles from the files that we just created. Okay, so now we can reference here with the new styles.app. Okay, cool. Then we can delete the header. So clean it up. All right, we can take a look if it's the site still working. Yeah, pretty much still works as it used to be. Okay, now since we have the new style module.css, we don't need our old app.css file anymore. So we can just go ahead and delete it. Cool. So now we can come back here and start to add our CSS custom variables. Let's create a new element called root, and inside we'll define one for the background color and one for the foreground text color. And notice the custom variable has a dash dash at the prefix. Okay, so now come back. We can add this root element with the new styles serve as the parent of the app div. Okay, let's take a look to see if everything's still wired correctly. Yeah. Cool. All right, now we can start to use them. In the app, we can just say our background color to refer to the root background color. And notice the function name var, which is the CSS function, building function that we can use to reference to the custom variables. And same thing for the color. We can refer to the color we just created. All right, cool. So now we can actually give it a spin and see if everything wired correctly. Let's first play with the maybe background color. Right now it's white, and we can just try it red. Oh man, this looks pretty cool. Of course, we need to change the margin into padding to cover the top area as well. All right, cool. We can maybe change it back or some different color, pink. Okay, cool. Seems wired pretty awesome here. And let's change it back. All right, we can also apply the color and change to red and see what happened. Cool. Everything's working great. Okay, now we have showed you that we can use the CSS custom variables to change the theme, overall background and foreground color inside the CSS file. So we're now ready to implement a theming prototype. But one thing we really want to make sure and first test out is whether we can use JavaScript to change the theme styles. So say we're coming to the app and we're gonna create a file called a theme component. All right. And inside we're create a theme component so that we can see if we can change the themes dynamically using JavaScript. So here we will want to wrap up all the content that we want to display. So we will support a prop called children. Let's create some interface for the theme component props. As we see, the first thing is the children, which is pretty much what you're gonna dump as the body of the page. Also, we need to import the React node so that we can finish the definition. All right, so the props support the children here. And that's why with the theme props. So these are all TypeScript definitions. Okay, so this serves as of the base of the theme component. Okay, now let's define the theme. So theme will be having a theme name that's called a light. And the background color and the foreground color are basically what you see in the CSS, but we want to duplicate here as a JavaScript first, just to test out the theory if this thing can be controlled by the JavaScript. All right. So since we're going to reuse the type of the theme, let's create a file called a theme.type. Basically, we want to give a definition of the theme. So the theme type will have the theme name. And the reason we're using the double dash here at the key is because we know sooner or later we'll send these definition to the CSS custom variable. So we just want to save some work of the converting back and forth. I'm sure you will find a way to write it more nicely, but here we're just taking a shortcut. All right, let's export this interface. And coming back, let's import it here, the theme type. From the file we just created. Okay, so now we can put the type here. All right, cool. So now since we have the theme, we can come here and try to send this theme into the parent element. This is a React way of injecting any styles to the element. So this attribute is called a style. And here we just need to convert it into the CSS properties because that's what's supported from that prop style. We probably make a mistake in terms of the typing. So let's just copy the CSS properties and paste it here and see if we can fix it. Okay, cool. All right. So let's see if we can, export the themes because we're going to use in the app. So let's import the theme from the file we just created. Okay, and it just export right away. And the reason we're creating the index file is just to make sure when we go to different other folders, we'll be able to import from this folder. So this is the reason we'll keep creating these index files. Okay, now we can come back to the app. Let's import the theme. From the components folder and theme folder. Okay, we can now replace this entire line with the theme parent as the parent element. All right, let's give a shot. EON. Cool. Yeah, and see if we can just come here and change something. We don't want to change the name, but we want to change the color a little bit. Hey, we still have all the functionality back there. But now everything is written in the JavaScript. So good job. And also, we don't need the app.module.css styles defined here because we relocated these to the JavaScript part. Okay, so let's remove it. We can also keep playing with these, see if everything's wired correctly. Cool, pretty good. Now we can change the theme and display the theme inside this theme component. Then we should be good to go to be able to change the theme dynamically. All right, so let's create two themes. All right, the first one is light.theme.ts. All right, we basically copy this theme we created before, and let's just export the light. And same thing for the dark. Let's copy it and create another one. And dark.theme.ts. And inside we basically just want to change the name to dark, as well as we want to flip the background and the foreground color. Okay. So with these two themes defined, we should be able to come back and import them. Okay, let's import the light and dark. Okay. We also need to have a dictionary of the theme so that when we switch, we can just refer the theme by name. So let's try to create that. Using the TypeScript, we can write the record with the key as a string and the variable type as a theme type. All right, then we can throw in both light and dark we just created. That's our themes collection. Okay, so, all right, we also need to have a state to store the current theme. All right, so you probably know what we should do. We come in here and do a use state. And now we can write constant theme as a theme and equals to use state. And let's put the initial theme, which is light. All right, we also want to be able to change the theme now. Okay, so let's make invent change theme and taking input of a theme name, for example. And inside we just want to call set theme, and themes, as long as you give me the name, I'll find the right theme and change it. Okay, now we already have the capability. We just need to add some UI layer. For example, let's make some rooms here, and inside we're going to add a section of div to support two buttons to switch the theme. All right, the first button will be onClick equals to so let's go change into an event. So this is probably going to make our life easier here. So change theme and the light. Okay, and give a caption to be light. Okay, let's duplicate and do the dark and the caption to be dark. Okay, now we see on the UI, there are two buttons there. We can give a shot and try EON. And light is same thing. Dark, wow, look at that. Seems pretty cool. Now we can really change the styles of the theme. All right, we have done fantastic jobs. But seems there's one limitation we had here when we add the switch buttons. That is, the button are created inside the theme component, and then it's installed at the parent of the app component. And this means that these switch buttons has to be displayed either before or after the app component. For example, here we just can display inside the children, so we cannot do it inside the app. Say we want to relocate the theme switch button to, for example, inside the Pokemon. All right, let's see. Or even just before the Pokemon here. It's kind of difficult just because who's going to provide this change theme function to us, right? Think about that question. The change theme function is provided by the theme component, but how we can get that function to be here? That's a very tricky question. And not to mention, suppose we don't display the theme switch component here. Instead, we dig into the Pokemon. Let's dig in further. Go to Pokemon search. Suppose we want to display the theme select, theme switch component here. Let's say after the this div. Same question again. Who's going to provide this change theme function to the Pokemon search here? Why this function actually provided from the theme component, which is installed very early on at the root of the theme component. Luckily, React provides a solution on this, a very complete solution, which is called a React context. Let's try to set up a one. All right, let's go to the theme folder. Let's first create this context. Let's name it the theme context.tsx. We're going to use the React utility function called create context to help us to create this context. The context requires a value, so let's define what we want to provide to the rest of the system. It's called a theme value, all right? And inside, we want to define the theme name and as well as the function that we were talking about, change theme. And once we define the theme value type, let's define some default value, which could be some empty set. The theme name to be nothing, and the change theme to be just an empty function. We're going to override these default values in the future. So for now, we can just keep them as kind of a dummy ones. All right, once the default value and the type has been set up, we can just use the create context and define as a theme value type and provide the default value at the starting point. And now we can export this theme context. Cool. All right, once we have the context, so the next thing to do is to provide this context to the rest of the system. All right, let's try to set up something called a theme provider. All right, it's a component. All right, so what this component does is trying to do majority of the job that we actually did for the theme. So we could just copy all the theme implementation to the theme provider. But the difference here is we want to make sure it can provide the theme to the rest of the elements. So let's see how can we amend it. All right, we want to import the theme context first from the file that we just created. I want to keep the theme type light and dark theme. We're going to change the props because we are working on theme provider props. And we want to support the initial theme. It's optional, which just give us a starting point. So now the function name, the component name, it's called a theme provider. And support initial theme and children. And the type is theme provider props. And inside we'll keep the majority of functionalities. We have a theme and change theme. We can change to theme name, set theme name. The name becomes the initial theme. And when we change the theme, we can just store the theme name instead. So let's just do and provide a function, not invent anymore. Let's just do a function, which is set theme name. Yeah, and while with the passing name. Okay, we're not worried too much about the UI layer yet. So let's delete those 3 lines. We're just making sure the theme can be provided to the rest of the children's. So we're going to use the theme context provider, and which accept one prop called a value. So this value is basically the context value that we trying to establish, which including the theme name and change theme. Here we're missing, I think is the definition of the theme name. We need to provide a default value. Yes. Okay, make it a light. So this way we don't have a comparison errors. Okay, so the theme is taken from the themes list, and given the theme name, we should be able to find out the themes. And now we just need to export the theme provider. And I noticed that we made a mistake of the function, the component name. We mistakenly take a theme provider props, which should be just the theme provider. All right, cool. So now we finished the theme context and the theme provider. Now the rest of the thing is to adjust the theme. So let's code all the functionality in a component properly this time called the theme switch.tss. And in this component, we're basically going to add those 2 buttons in. Yeah, from this the old theme files. We can copy everything over, but most likely we're going to delete the most of the functionality, except that we're just going to keep the 2 buttons. Let's change the name to theme switch, which doesn't take any children. We're going to delete majority of the things we don't need, while just keep the functionality of switching with the buttons. Cool. All right, so the only thing left here is to see who's going to give us the change themes functions. Since we already have a context, let's use a hook from the React called useContext. All right, so let's rewrite these couple lines. The theme name and the change theme will be able to be fetched from the useContext while with the theme context. Cool. We just need to import the theme context. All right, with that, then we sure have the theme name and change themes. We could just display the theme name for fun. Okay. And we need to write invent, because when we export from the context, we use the function. We didn't use invent. So here we're just going to recreate invent quickly. If given a theme name, we give you an invent, which will call the change theme with that theme name. All right, with that, we should be able to just quickly wire the events. This one is light, and the next one is dark. Okay, now we have theme switch component finished. We just need to find the place that we want to display the theme switch. Let's go back to the app. All right. We can now import the theme provider. Remember, we don't need a theme anymore. Before that, let's work on some index, which we already have. We're going to import the theme provider and theme context. Most likely we need that as well. And theme switch. Yeah, and also I mentioned that we don't need a theme anymore because it served the original purpose for the demonstration, but now we have the provider. We're just gonna use the context, provider, and the theme switch. Okay, now we have this folder exported. We'll come back to the app and we're gonna import the theme provider and replace the theme with the theme provider. Okay, now we just need to find out where we want to display the theme switch. All right, let's import it. Okay, and let's for now just install it before the Pokemon. I read the syntax wrong. Okay, let's do the component. Cool, let's give a shot. It's already displayed on our UI. All right. Typing something, EON. Let's do dark, man, light. Okay, it's pretty much worked. And we can install the theme switch anywhere we want, as long as it's inside the theme provider. The last thing is to touch up on the theme switch to make it look a little bit nicer. Let's create a file, theme switch, module.css. And inside, let's define element called the themes because we want to support a list of themes. Let's use the flex layout and justify content to be flex in. We want to align to the right and make a little bit gap between each of the themes. Let's give it a little bit padding. All right, so now we can come back and let's import the styles. From the file we just created. Okay, so now we can reference here, class name equals to the styles themes. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay, it already worked. All right, so now we can continue with the button. Yeah. Yeah, let's add another button. And here, we want to make sure they look like just plain text. So we can do the background transparent and the border to be none. And let's also give the text transform to be capitalized so that the first letter is uppercase. Okay, now we can go back and apply the styles of the button to each of them. So let's give class name styles.button for the first one. And the same thing for the class button equals to the styles.button for the second one. Okay, all right, so they more or less look like a text now. Let's adjust the gap a little bit because they are too apart from each other. So let's give it 0.2. So the one thing we noticed is, see, when you click the dark, the background just disappeared, the text, you couldn't see it. So since we're already under our theming conventions here, our theming system, so we could start to use our theme variables, var background color for the background color, and same thing for the foreground text color. All right, let's give a shot for this. When we click dark, yeah, the text still visible because we flipped the theme now. It's pretty cool. Let's further adjust the gap a little bit. Make sure they stick together. All right, the other thing we forgot is, yeah, if the button is focused, we want to make the font to be a bold. So this way we can differentiate what is the current theme. It's just a very cheap way to get it working. All right. But we also noticed the same issues applies to the input. Basically, when we switched to dark, we couldn't see the text that we entered. So let's apply the same thing we actually just did for the buttons. Let's copy those two lines and then go to the input. And we already have a background color. We just delete the old one, apply the new one. Oh, wow. You can see it's already working. All right, let's play a little bit. Pretty nice. Good job. Now, since we get everything working, we can take a look at what is really the context. What is the context provider and what is the useContext hook? Though there's a lot to learn here, logically they're making perfect sense, so it shouldn't have too much difficulty to understand. Basically, it takes 3 steps to go through this process, and we have done them one by one. So the first step is the context as we defined in the theme context.tsx. The context is created from your own data type, in our case theme value, where we store the name of the theme as well as the function to switch the theme on the fly. This is precisely the step where you think of what type of context you'd like to set up to suit your own business need. Okay. We then use create context to create a context out of this value type. This is where we define the default context values as well. The default value is a starting point. If the value isn't going to be changed, it'll be the only value. And sometimes people use the context to send a static value, a value that never changes throughout the whole process. Once we have the context, the second step is to set up a provider that can be used as a root component of your choice. As we have seen in the theme provider.tsx. The provider can be grabbed out of the created context via its utility context.provider. Notice the context is our context. This provider component has a single prop value, which can be used to pass in new context value to replace the default one. In our theme example, we use the state theme. And whenever this theme name changes, the theme provider component re-renders. Thus a new context value gets assembled again and sent to the theme context.provider. Once the context and the provider are all set up, the third step is to go to any component to consume it. We normally refer any child component here as a consumer component because they all can grab the latest copy of the context value via hook useContext. And this useContext hook is provided by React. In our case, since the context value contains the theme name as well as a function to change the theme, we then be able to manage to switch the theme in any consumer component. And so you can see it does take some effort to set up and use the context. But once we have gone through these 3 steps, you should be able to take advantage of this approach to send any values or functions into an area of components under a root component. And this approach is sort of having an area effect or area coverage. And this approach is quite popular. In fact, You can find its usage in lots of open source third-party libraries, and especially the libraries dealing with tables, forms, or even animations. All right, cool. Congratulations that you learned a very powerful hook useContext in this video. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.